Editing me here. Before we begin, I wanted to say first of all, I apologize for being so morose and almost serious in the very beginning of this video. I don't know why I was speaking like that. Second of all, I think this video made me realize I have a lazy eye. I've never noticed it before, but it was distracting me the whole time I was editing. And this is the first time I've used this setup, so I think I'm just never going to use it again. I apologize and please enjoy. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing madness as a form of freedom in literature. The first of this little video essay mini-series is going to be The Yellow Wallpaper, which is a short story by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I was going to do a longer video which includes the other little books that I feel fit into this genre, like The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe or Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, but I thought it would be nicer to split them into separate videos so that I could focus on each, especially because I want to find my groove before I go into the more significant or important video essays like the Alice in Wonderland one and many others which I have briefly mentioned in previous videos, like ones on the Hunger Games, Harry Potter, A Series of Unfortunate Events. If you guys have any tips, do let me know about the format of how I'm doing these, but I'm really excited to start. I think this is different to my regular book recommendations videos or book hauls, which I of course enjoy doing, but I think this gives you more insight into how I actually analyze novels. Before I start, of course, please make sure to like and subscribe. Like I said, I do all kinds of videos as well. I do writing content, I have some vlogs up, and I plan to do some more vlogs when I start university as well. This video is largely based on an essay that I wrote that's up on Substack and Medium, so please go check those out as well. This is going to be, of course, a little bit more conversationalist. I'm going to add some tidbits as well. I have my notes on my iPad here, so don't mind me if I'm looking to the side every once in a while. Of course, this video is going to have spoilers, so I'm going to link The Yellow Wallpaper in the description. I would definitely recommend reading that first. If you don't want to, it's also fine. I'm of course going to start by discussing what the Yellow Wallpaper is. The Yellow Wallpaper is a short story by Charlotte Perkins Gilman which was published in 1892, which is actually when the novel I'm writing is set. It details a woman who is suffering from what we would now recognize as postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis. She descends into madness after being assigned a very restrictive breast cure which forbids her from doing mentally stimulating activities like reading or writing or creatively expressing or consuming anything of the sort. Throughout the story, the woman Jane becomes obsessed with the yellow wallpaper in her bedroom. At first, she's very disgusted and revolted by it, but by the end, she seems to become infatuated by it and eventually believes that there is a woman stuck behind the wallpaper. The story ends with Jane tearing apart the yellow wallpaper and going insane, believing herself to be the woman who was trapped behind the wallpaper, who has finally escaped. I want to talk about the history of women's madness and insanity in literature before 1892. Aside from literature in the 19th century, women's madness and insanity was often seen as either linked to their biology, as many doctors believed that women went insane and were more prone to mental disorders because of their reproductive cycles, or due to their failing in their roles as mothers and wives. The idea of a woman who was mad was very heavily linked to devils and sins. As a result, many people abused this and could very easily call and label any woman mad, and she would instantly be shunned from society, or even worse. As we've seen, for example, in the Salem witch trials, any woman who was seen as out of the ordinary, for example, would be labeled a witch and killed. By labeling women as insane, men would be able to pathologize disobedience, grief, or ambition. Because women would so easily be labeled as insane in society, and because of how revered the term and idea was, even being linked to someone who is insane would have you shunned from society. There were many unconventional methods that were used to remove this madness from women, which were either ineffective or quite simply torturous. In literature, women who are mad are seen as being so for punishment or to emphasize their ultimate innocence and submission to men. We can see this through the most famous works of William Shakespeare, who is the greatest or most famous playwright of English history. Shakespeare's works very frequently display women who go mad. In Romeo and Juliet, Juliet commits suicide, which was linked to madness, because her lover, Romeo, also committed suicide. In Hamlet, Ophelia's madness after losing the man she loves is portrayed as tragic, often sexualized, and very innocent. Those two, Juliet and Ophelia, are examples of women who went insane, and it was a symbol to their submission to men and their femininity and sensitivity and fragility. On the other hand, we see characters like Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth is very unconventional and was a very unconventional female character at the time, but in fact we see that she goes mad not because of sorrow or grief for another man, but because of her own guilt for aiding in the murder of King Duncan. She descends into madness because she is so fragile and ultimately feminine, therefore she must go mad. Her madness is shamed and shunned and portrayed as a punishment for her sins. Thus, only if a woman went mad for a man was it seen as legitimate and a testament to the fragility of the female psyche. Otherwise, it's because she isn't acting feminine and isn't being who she's meant to be. Charlotte Perkins Gilman is the author of the Yellow Wallpaper, and she lived from 1860 to 1935. She was American, and she was a writer, lecturer, and one of the leading voices of first-wave feminism. In 1885, she gave birth to her first daughter, and she suffered from what we would now recognize as postpartum psychosis. Her doctor at the time was neurologist Dr. Silas Ware Mitchell, and Dr. Mitchell diagnosed her with nervous depression, and he prescribed her his rest cure, which he was a pioneering founder of. The rest cure is a treatment involving forced bed rest, isolation, overfeeding, and an extreme suppression of creative expression or indulgence. Modern science has, of course, found no evidence of the benefit of the conditions the rest cure placed women under. The forced inactivity would in fact be very likely to exacerbate the patient's conditions, refusing the patient's autonomy or ability to move around and express themselves. It'll lead to psychological distress, physical deconditioning, and the maddening feeling of being trapped and inconsequential. Gilman wrote the Yellow Wallpaper as a direct response to this rest cure. It of course reflects her wider critique of women's confinement, both physically and socially. We're finally moving on to the content of the Yellow Wallpaper, and two areas I want to discuss are the symbolism of the wallpaper and the ending of the Yellow Wallpaper. I'm going to start with the symbolism of the Yellow Wallpaper. As I said, Jane, the narrator, is increasingly infatuated by the wallpaper in her bedroom, and of course, being mostly confined there, she has a lot of time to dwell on it. I felt at first it was meant to represent patriarchal language, which is incoherent and imposed. One of the first lines or descriptions of the Yellow Wallpaper is that the color is repellent, almost revolting. The sickening, decaying color of yellow is a manifestation of how society and husbands such as Jane's husband suffocate women through isolation. The description of the wallpaper being revolting continues on for a while, but eventually it kind of becomes almost solace. She says that there are things in that paper which nobody knows but me or ever will. By being able to recognize its ultimate ugliness and the secrets behind the wallpaper, she has something that no man and her husband and her doctor cannot intrude on, and they can never understand the wallpaper and they can never understand how ugly it is. She has something for herself, and it's kind of the first sign that the wallpaper is not only becoming a solace but a metaphor and representation of her freedom and her defiance, because although the story begins with her saying that my husband must be right because he is a doctor and my doctors must be right, the fact that she's writing this down, the book is in first person, she recognizes that she's writing in her diary, shows a defiance of these norms and ideals that are placed on her. The wallpaper is of course a metaphor and mirror of her condition. it's ugly and sickening and surrounds the walls of her room. She says that behind that outside pattern, dim shapes get clearer every day. This is not only demonstrating her deteriorating mental state, of course, she's starting to imagine things behind the wallpaper, but also her growing clarity about society. Jane describes the shape of a woman stooping down and creeping behind the pattern. She also says nobody could climb through that pattern, it strangles, so I think that is why it has so many heads, and I saw that as a symbolism of society, and the women who try to defy these ideals and escaped are strangled. Of course, all her suppressed creativity is being manifested onto the wallpaper, but also Jane is like the wallpaper in that she is confined into a room and she is forced to be instrumental and pretty in keeping homes together. Wallpapers are meant to hide the faults of a wall and to make a room look more intact, and it's meant to stay within homes, and I think that is symbolic of how women were expected to be at the time. The final thing I want to discuss is, of course, the ending of the Yellow Wallpaper. In the end, Jane tears down the wallpaper and goes insane once and for all. This becomes an act of violent self-recognition and rebellion, and it's a symbolic freeing of women, including herself, from the confines of what is normal and sane to society. Gilman seems to almost be questioning if sanity is possible or even moral in such a corrupt society. Perhaps sanity under oppression is the real horror. Jane's breakdown is the most autonomous thing that she does. She believes herself to be the woman in the wallpaper and starts speaking in the first person as the woman. She says, "I wonder if they all come out of that wallpaper as I did." Gilman is almost rhetorically questioning whether all struggling women struggled the way she did and had to tear their lives by the root in order to be freed. She rejects her husband John by physically not allowing him into the room. She locks it and says, "It is no use, young man, you can't open it," which I found was symbolic to how inaccessible she has become to him, not only because she has become mentally insane, but because she has become aware that he has done her wrong. She speaks a language that he does not, and that language is one where she's free. Her final attestment that "I had to creep over him every time." Again, creep is used also to describe the woman behind the wallpaper and now used to describe herself because she believes she is that woman. She also says, "Why should that man have fainted?" You see here that she says young man, him, that man, and I think the generalization of that and that he has such a basic name like John goes to show that she is saying most men are like this in a patriarchal society, and she doesn't want it to be very specific to the character of her husband, of course. Also, in fainting, John rids himself of a voice or autonomy. The roles are kind of reversed, and it also shows that he's unable to handle and control a woman as freed as Jane was. One interpretation of the ending is that Jane ripped up her own skin physically, hence why her husband fainted, and maybe why she was going extremely insane at the end, maybe because she was losing a lot of blood. With this interpretation, her skin being the yellow wallpaper, the yellowness would show how sick she was, but also her recognizing that she is kind of playing a part and covering her true self. The fact that she would find it so ugly would show that she finds her confinement very ugly. In this interpretation, she very literally releases herself from the physical confines and ideals of womanhood for being aesthetic and pretty. By rejecting her physicality, she's also rejecting the physical science, which was allegedly the grounds on which the rest cure was created. In any case, by going mad, Jane sets herself free. And that is it for today's video. I really hope you guys enjoyed. I'm sorry if it was a bit stiff. Again, I was reading off of my essay and just trying to add some stuff. I'm not as comfortable with this video style. If you guys have any tips, also let me know. Of course, some of my other video essay ideas, like I mentioned in the beginning, like the Hunger Games or Harry Potter, they're a bit more lighthearted, even if I'm going to discuss heavier themes. So it's going to be more conversational and hopefully a bit more entertaining. I don't want this to sound like a lecture, but I do hope you guys enjoyed. The Yellow Wallpaper is a wonderful short story and I would definitely recommend reading it. Again, I put it in the description. I also put this essay on Substack and Medium. Please go follow me on there. Also on my TikTok, which I've started posting on a little bit too. My next video is likely either going to be a writing vlog or a summer reading wrap up. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys a little bit sooner than next week. How do I make my iPad not close every 2 seconds? Please. Auto lock 10 minutes.